Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Corner at Choose Adventure Media. I'm your host Zach, and in today's video, I'm going to be breaking down the first round of the NFL draft and giving my immediate impressions. All right, the first thing I want to talk about is the huge trade that opened the night. The Jacksonville Jaguars trade up to get Travis Hunter, and the Cleveland Browns trade back, and they get back a couple of really valuable draft picks later on. My immediate impression was that giving up their first round pick next year was maybe a little too much to only trade up 3 positions. But then I realized Travis Hunter is a very special player, and in reality, he's a first round quality cornerback and a first round quality wide receiver. So it kind of makes sense to give them a second first rounder for someone that is effectively 2 players. It's a lot, don't get me wrong. I just think Travis Hunter is an incredibly special player. So I really like that the Jacksonville Jaguars did this. The New York Giants took Abdul Carter at number 3. This came as no surprise. I know ESPN was really trying to push the narrative that the Giants were going to draft a quarterback and that they were going to draft Shedeur Sanders. A lot of people knew that Shedeur wasn't going to go in the first round, and if he did, it wasn't going to be until the 20s. So the New York Giants, they draft Abdul Carter, and some people speculated that meant that they would be trading Kayvon Thibodeaux, but then a few minutes later, they picked up Kayvon Thibodeaux's 5th-year option, meaning that the New York Giants want to invest in these bookends pass rushers for years to come. I love that idea, and now this defensive line is really, really good with Kayvon Thibodeaux, Abdul Carter, and Dexter Lawrence, and that's a great foundation to start your rebuild. And I also love that they signed Javon Holland in the offseason, so they made a lot of really key additions to that defense, and it's a great start. I want to talk about the Patriots picking Will Campbell at number 4. And while it wasn't a surprising pick, everyone kind of knew it was going to happen, I think a lot of people are getting too caught up in positional value. And Will Campbell has shorter arms, but he held his own in the SEC. Granted, the NFL is very different than the SEC, but he was a great offensive tackle in college, and I think he should absolutely have the opportunity to play offensive tackle for the New England Patriots. And I think at the worst case scenario, I think he'll be a very good offensive guard for them. And I saw an interesting quote from Bill Simmons, who said that, talking about Quentin Nelson going in the teens, I believe, in the 2012 draft. And he said, okay, so if we redrafted that draft today, would you not take him in the top 6? And basically talking about, if you can get an awesome offensive lineman, you get him. Doesn't matter where you draft him, especially in this year's draft that kind of lacks that top tier premium blue chip prospect. And also, he's just a very high character guy, and he's an immediate leader on that offense. And it just proves to your franchise quarterback, Drake May, that you're willing to invest in him and willing to invest in protecting him and giving him tools around him. I like the Cleveland Browns taking Mason Graham at number 5. I think it helps out Myles Garrett, and I think it kind of makes the Myles Garrett re-signing make a little bit more sense because some people thought they would maybe take Abdul Carter at number 2, but this will help create opportunities for Myles Garrett on the edge, and Mason Graham is just a disruptor, and he's going to create plenty of havoc on his own in the interior of that defensive line. A lot of people, his biggest weaknesses are shorter arms. I'm not really worried about that. He's a championship level wrestler, so I think he's great at that. And people were saying he needs to develop his pass rushing arsenal some more, and who better to do that than Myles Garrett. I also want to give some credit to the Las Vegas Raiders. They pulled a phenomenal smokescreen this week. So many rumors were all over the place that the Raiders were not drafting Ashton Jeanty, like a lot of people had predicted they would. And then they surprised everyone by drafting Ashton Jeanty. phenomenal running back. A lot of people were comparing him to Emmitt Smith, which I love that comparison. He's got great vision and great lower body balance and power. And he has more breakaway speed than Emmitt Smith had. Obviously not saying he's the next Emmitt Smith. I'm just talking about traits that he potentially has. Love this start. I love giving Chip Kelly a weapon like this. And the Raiders offense was awful outside of Brock Bowers. So this is just going to enhance Brock Bowers even more by giving them a threat of a running threat. The Panthers really shocked me at number 8 by not taking Jalen Walker. Again, this draft cycle, they did a really good job of putting up smoke screens of talking about, in less words than this, saying we're only going to focus on defense in the draft because their defense was so horrible last year. But I love drafting Tedoroya McMillan. I think he's a great player. I love his size. Yes, he sometimes struggled to create separation at the college level, and that's not going to get easier in the NFL. But I think he's just a unique physical specimen. He was a very good volleyball player in high school, and that proves in his vertical ability and kind of contested catches and stuff like that. So I love investing in Bryce Young too. Obviously in the middle of last year, it looked like the Panthers were maybe going to move on from Bryce Young. But I love that this is saying, no, we're going to stand by our former number 1 overall pick since he showed improvement this year. I also love the pick at number 10, the Chicago Bears picking Colston Loveland, the tight end out of Michigan. He's not going to be your traditional tight end. So I know a lot of Bears fans were thinking they maybe didn't need a tight end. He's unlike anything they currently have on the roster. He's in the pass game. A lot of people were saying he's almost as good as Brock Bowers in the receiving game, which is obviously very high praise. Brock Bowers was an all-pro last year for the Las Vegas Raiders. So if the Chicago Bears compare that with a good rising quarterback in Caleb Williams, on top of the offensive line additions that they made in free agency, I'd bet that they're going to draft a running back in later rounds. I love the Chicago Bears offseason. I think they've had one of the best offseasons so far, and adding Colston Loveland certainly does that. Last year, he only had 2 drops, even though Michigan had some really bad quarterback play. So I think that just really speaks to he's a great receiver, great hands, and he's learning as a blocker. But I mean, he's 6'6", 248 pounds, around there. He can learn how to block for sure. So love this pick by the Bears. I thought the pick by the San Francisco 49ers at 11 was interesting. I'm not the biggest fan because the 49ers need so much help on defense, and they drafted Mykel Williams, who in doing so is kind of really betting on some traits. He's incredibly young. He's only 20 years old. He won't turn 21 until June. But he's very raw. And I trust in Robert Saleh. I think he can develop that. Obviously, has a proven track record of developing elite pass rushers, and he already has Nick Bosa on the roster to help with that. I just think they should have gone for a little bit more known entity because of how much help they need on defense besides Fred Warner and Nick Bosa. Probably the worst pick of the night was probably the Dallas Cowboys picking Tyler Booker, not because of need. I'm just thinking value. With Tyler Warren still on the board, I can't help but wonder that they were teams, maybe the Chargers, maybe the Broncos, that were wanting to trade up to draft Tyler Warren. So I think there was potential for a trade back. A lot of people just love to say, oh, they should have just traded back, when in reality, it takes 2 to tango. And so I think there was potential to trade back there. So I think drafting Tyler Booker here, while I love him as a prospect. I love him in the pass game. He's gonna struggle a little bit to get up to the second level in the run game, but he's also a very high character guy. Some people were saying he's the Will Anderson Jr. of the offensive line in terms of just being high football character, meaning football habits and stuff like that. I think the Cowboys could have maybe gotten a little bit better value here. Probably my favorite pick of the first round, or my favorite fit, is the Indianapolis Colts getting Tyler Warren. Obviously a huge need for them, and I think he just fits their offense perfectly. And I also love that this is giving Anthony Richardson, most likely another weapon to kind of prove whether or not he's going to be the quarterback in Indianapolis for the long term. The Atlanta Falcons also got a steal at 15 in Jalen Walker. If you haven't already, go check out my video where I break down Jalen Walker and where he should have been drafted, or where I thought he should have been drafted. And I love that the Atlanta Falcons draft him. The Atlanta Falcons have been one of the worst pass rushing teams, honestly, for the last 5 to 7 years, and they just haven't done a very good job of addressing that. But they did a great job in addressing this with Jalen Walker, and also get the added versatility of him being that off-ball middle linebacker, will linebacker. He can really play anywhere with a very high football IQ. Love this pick by the Atlanta Falcons. I also want to talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers drafting Emeka Egbuka, the wide receiver out of Ohio State. And at first, this pick doesn't make a ton of sense. They kind of need an edge rusher. They probably could have used another linebacker or a secondary player. But what this is doing is really setting up their offense for the long haul in terms of being future proof. So a couple of years ago, their wide receiver room was pretty old. Obviously, Mike Evans is getting up there. Chris Godwin's getting up there and has some injury concerns. But they draft Bucky Irving last year. They draft Jalen McMillan in the 3rd round last year. And all of a sudden, you add another 1st-round wide receiver, and you have some young offensive weapons to build around Baker Mayfield and help, I guess, kind of future-proof Baker Mayfield as well. And they can obviously learn from Mike Evans, and they have 4 very solid wide receivers to throw out there in case there is an injury, or just to have 4 wide receiver sets. So I love this pick. Emeka Egbuka is the perfect quarterback's best friend, safety blanket. He's not going to wow you with anything, but he's just a very solid wide receiver, and also a great run blocker, which is obviously great considering the success that Bucky Irving had last year. A lot of people also are comparing him to Terry McLaurin, and Terry McLaurin, if they could get that in Tampa Bay, would be amazing. So he's not a Toyota Prius. He is exciting, but he's just maybe not a Marvin Harrison Jr. or a Jackson Smith and Jigba, even though I don't think he's that far off from JSN. I think he's actually really good. The Pittsburgh Steelers, they shocked, I know at least ESPN, because ESPN was convinced the Steelers were going to take Shedeur Sanders. They take Derek Harmon, which I love. He's incredibly disruptive on the interior. And I think it's great already finding the Cameron Hayward replacement. And the other cool tidbit is that Derek Harmon, his biggest idol is Cameron Hayward, and he modeled his game to be like Cameron Hayward, which is obviously really cool that he can now go learn from him. Who knows what Aaron Rodgers is doing? Aaron Rodgers is Aaron Rodgers, but they just got a good football player, and I love this addition. And they're just going to be an incredible roster everywhere, and whoever comes in to play quarterback is going to go in and play quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I also love the next 2 picks. I love Omarion Hampton going to the Los Angeles Chargers. I think he's a great running back, and I really like him as a prospect. I especially like him for the Chargers. He's a great scheme fit there. I feel like he's the most Michigan running back that didn't play at Michigan. And what I mean by that is he's not a running back that is good in a phone booth, making a guy miss in short area. He doesn't have great short area explosiveness or agility, but he's incredible at breaking tackles once he gets momentum. And that's exactly what the Chargers offense is set up for. And then I think he also was in the 96th percentile in broken tackles after catching the ball out of the backfield. So that's obviously giving Justin Herbert another weapon in the passing game. For Chargers fans, I've been told he's not Austin Eckler. He's gonna be something a little different. He does have great speed. It just takes him some momentum to get going, and he certainly can break a tackle. Put on his tape, he breaks tackles everywhere. And the Green Bay Packers finally did it. For the 2nd time in my lifetime, they drafted a wide receiver in the 1st round. I love Matthew Golden. I know I've talked about him in a previous video. I don't think enough people talk about how good his hands are. I think he makes some spectacular catches, and I just haven't seen enough people talk about that. The other big trait with him is that whenever Texas needed a play or needed someone to make a catch, he was their guy. I loved watching Texas because of Matthew Golden. He's an incredibly explosive player, obviously, with that 4.29 40-yard dash speed. I don't know if he necessarily plays that fast, but he does play quickly. And he's just a playmaker. He's an explosive playmaker, and that's something the Green Bay Packers don't have, and they got that in Matthew Golden. Another head scratcher pick was the Minnesota Vikings, and again, it's not the prospect. I love the prospect. I love the fit. I don't love the value. They selected Donovan Jackson, offensive guard out of Ohio State, and I love Donovan Jackson as a guard, and he fits their system incredibly well. And he also has some offensive tackle flexibility. He proved that when Josh Simmons went out earlier this year with an injury. He played well at offensive tackle. I don't think you should put him at offensive tackle, but he can play it in a pinch. And he's just a very solid, going to be their one of their guards for the next 10 years. I just think they maybe could have traded back. And again, the evidence for this is that the next 2 picks, I believe, were traded back. So clearly there were teams wanting to trade up. And I think the Minnesota Vikings in particular, they only have 4 or 5 draft picks this year. I think they should have capitalized and maybe gotten some later draft picks, and probably still could have gotten Donovan Jackson, maybe trading with the Giants instead, or the Atlanta Falcons, who traded up 2 picks later. Probably one of the picks that's going to be talked about the most out of tonight is the New York Giants selecting Jackson Dart. And he just fits Brian Daboll's system better than Shedeur Sanders. He probably has a slightly stronger arm than Shedeur Sanders does. And he's more mobile, which is the big thing. And the thing is a lot of people are saying Jackson Dart isn't going to be a good quarterback because of the college system he played in. However, Brian Daboll is one of the best offensive minds in the NFL. So Jackson Dart, coming from a system that had a lot of predetermined reads, there's not too many better people in the NFL to kind of coach that than Brian Daboll. And so I think Jackson Dart has some better traits that you can't teach that are better than Shedeur, especially for Brian Daboll's system. So he's certainly coachable, and I love this fit. I love giving Brian Daboll finally a weapon-ish that he's kind of picked and that's kind of crafted for his system. He wasn't in the regime whenever Daniel Jones was drafted, so I like finally giving Brian Daboll a weapon in kind of a prove-it year. The next pick for the Atlanta Falcons, I love the fit. I love the prospect. I don't know if I love the value. The Atlanta Falcons, they got the pick from the Rams and a 3rd round pick in this year's draft. And the Rams in exchange got a 2nd rounder this year, a 7th rounder this year, and a 1st rounder next year. It's just a lot to give up. I like what it creates for Atlanta in terms of they now have, one of the most explosive pass rushing duos, as well as one of the most versatile with James Pierce Jr. and Jalen Walker. They're not just right ends that are always going to be positioned on the outside shoulder of the offensive tackle. They can both drop into coverage. And so it gives you a lot of versatility. And they're also just very explosive. A lot of people are talking about James Pierce Jr. being the 2nd best pure pass rusher in this class. And Jalen Walker is also up there as well. Some people had football character concerns about James Pierce Jr. Again, meaning practice habits and stuff like that. But again, on the football field, he's explosive. And Todd McShay had the best take, and he said, if I don't see it on Saturdays or if I don't see it on game days, I'm not worried about it. And I think I agree with that. A lot of people are saying the production dropped off. And I mean, we saw the production drop off with Jadeveon Clowney in his 2nd to 3rd year at South Carolina in terms of, I know I'm going to be a high draft pick, so I'm not going to try as hard. And sometimes players have to look out for their best interests. And I don't think that really applies in the NFL because that's the ultimate goal. So love this pick for the Falcons. It's a little risky giving up that 1st round draft pick next year, but now they have a really solid young core with Michael Penix Jr., Drake London on the offense, and AJ Terrell, James Pierce Jr., and Jalen Walker on the defense. Love all those young pieces. The Baltimore Ravens selected Malachi Starks, the safety out of Georgia, and I think Malachi Starks dropped because Nick Emenwari, the safety out of South Carolina, was in this class. Nick Emenwari put on one of the best NFL combine performances we've ever seen, especially for a guy over 200 pounds, like literally one of the most explosive performances by someone that size. And Malachi Starks just isn't that. He's not a snail, but he ran a 4.5 40. And what he lacks in maybe physical attributes, he makes up for in instinctiveness and a high football IQ. He's incredibly smart, and he's going to come in and he's going to play that center fielder ball hawking role. He just makes plays on the ball. And I think he's a great complement to Kyle Hamilton. And he also has a lot of flexibility. If you watch this tape when he's playing a cornerback position, he looks like, honestly, a first-round cornerback prospect. I don't think that's his strength because of his physical attributes, but he's a very good football player, and I think the Baltimore Ravens hit a home run with this pick. I think the Detroit Lions picking Tyleik Williams was a little interesting. I don't hate it because a lot of the edges were already off the board, so you were kind of picking between Donovan Ezaraku out of Boston College and Mike Green out of Marshall if you were going to pick edge. And I know Mike Green had some football character concerns and some off the field stuff. I really like Donovan Ezaraku as a prospect, but I'm also not sitting in the interviews with these teams, so I don't know what he said in those interviews. Tyleik Williams does help the Detroit Lions. He will create more opportunities for Aiden Hutchinson by collapsing the inside of the pocket at an elite level. He's 330 pounds and moves incredibly well, and there's always a spot on the football team for that. While he's maybe not the best pass rusher, he's an elite run defender, and he has versatility. He can play the nose tackle to the 3 technique. While it's a little bit of a head scratcher, they also do need defensive tackle, since one of their defensive tackles will most likely be out most, if not all of the year with a knee injury that they suffered in week 15. So while it's a little bit of a head scratcher, a lot of people really thought Tyleik Williams was very solidly a second round draft pick. I really like it and think it addresses a need for the Detroit Lions. All right, and now I want to talk about the Buffalo Bills drafting Maxwell Hairston. I know a lot of Buffalo Bills fans probably maybe have some PTSD from drafting Kaiir Elam a couple of years ago, but they are pretty polar opposite players. Kaiir Elam is more the prototypical size, when Maxwell Hairston is a little small. I think he's around the 180 pound mark. The strengths of Maxwell Hairston are what made Kaiir Elam not succeed in Buffalo, meaning Maxwell Hairston is at his best when the ball is in the air. He has incredible ball skills. He's great at making plays in terms of interceptions and pass deflections. And that was something that was where Kaiir Elam struggled. And that was where, honestly, the entire Buffalo Bills defense struggled last year. So I love this. I think it perfectly fits their need. He's incredibly fast. He ran the fastest 40-yard dash time at the NFL Combine this year. So I think it's a great fit. He has a lot of versatility. He can play outside, inside, man, zone. So I love this fit for the Buffalo Bills. So don't be worried. It's not another Kaiir Elam. I think it'll be a great fit in Buffalo. I love the Philadelphia Eagles drafting Jahad Campbell out of Alabama. Jahad Campbell is one of the top 15 players in this draft. He just fell because of medical concerns. He ran, I believe, a 4.5 40 at the NFL Combine, which is very fast for a linebacker. And then he had shoulder surgery, and he most likely will need surgery on his other shoulder as well at some point in the next year. He also has a nagging knee injury. So with all these medical concerns, a lot of teams weren't willing to take the risk on him, and understandably so. But the Philadelphia Eagles, who are absolutely loaded with talent and loaded with draft picks, they were the perfect team to take a risk on Jahad Campbell. They can absolutely let him recover. And when he's healthy, he's an incredibly instinctive player. And whenever he sees the ball, he closes in on the ball carrier very, very quickly. And so he has a lot of potential. And I think he'll be able to learn from guys like Nakobe Dean and Zach Bond. And I think there's a lot of potential there to eventually become a great player and kind of draft and stash this player a little bit. Love this pick for the Eagles. Although I am a little confused about the trade between the Chiefs and the Eagles. It's a little weird to flip-flop picks, especially since those teams maybe have a little bit of bad blood since they just played in the Super Bowl. The only thing I can think of is I think there were maybe other teams that were probably going to trade up to either get Josh Simmons or Jihad Campbell. So that's probably why the teams did it. But still funny. Great job by Howie Roseman, Hall of Fame GM for sure. And we'll talk about the last pick now. Pick number 32, the Kansas City Chiefs picking offensive tackle out of Ohio State, Josh Simmons. And every NFL scout report I'm seeing is that Josh Simmons was the best offensive tackle, purely skill-based in this class. However, he had two reasons that dropped him to pick number 32. And the first is the knee injury that he suffered earlier on in the season. He suffered a torn patellar tendon. Yes, a torn patellar tendon right before they played Oregon. And that was a softer part of their schedule in terms of maybe not as good opponents. So the tape he put on this year was only against not so good opponents. So that dropped his value in itself. And the actual injury itself sometimes takes about 12 months to actually fully come back from. I know a lot of people are saying he's ahead in his rehab, but there's a big difference from being able to work out and truly feeling like yourself and being that dominant athlete. And the second is there's some concerns of maturity slash football character, which I talked about earlier. I'm not really worried about it. I think it's different at the NFL level. And especially with Andy Reid, I think it's the perfect team to take a swing on Josh Simmons. And I think they could really develop him into being, a Pro Bowl offensive tackle, all-pro offensive tackle, because of his traits. Moves incredibly well. That's his big thing, is how well he moves. He latches on with leverage and he sustains in the run game. He technically does have some shorter arms, which is talked a lot about with this draft class. And sometimes his technique does get a little sloppy, but his movement skills are unlike any other. So I think a lot of the other stuff can be coached up when you can't really teach movement, especially when you're at that 6'5", I think 310, 315 pounds, something like that. If he matures and if he gets healthy, he absolutely can be, a franchise all-pro tackle. And so Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes should be very happy with this pick. All right, that wraps up my analysis of the first round of the 2025 NFL Draft. I'll be doing an analysis like this of day 2 and day 3. Make sure to hit that like button. Please subscribe and turn off those post notifications. It really helps out the channel. My name is Zach. This is the Sports Corner at Choose Adventure Media, and I'll see you in the next video.